again. I just knocked him on my camera. I'm picking it up. Sorry about that.
Hi my lovelies, and welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be a ranking Halloween edition. So last year for my Halloween special, I talked about R.L. Stine's The Haunting Hour and even made like a follow-up video this past June. R.L. Stine's The Haunting Hour, for those who aren't familiar, is a horror fantasy anthology series based off the 2007 movie R.L. Stine's The Haunting Hour. Don't Think About It, I believe, which I've actually never seen, ironically enough. Like, maybe that's what I need next year's Halloween special to be. But each episode follows a different, like, horror story, and they're directed at kids, similar to Goosebumps, but on a whole different level. Like, Goosebumps is very mild compared to this series. Like, while I'm a kid who grew up on Goosebumps as well and remember binging the series, I favored this show because I am someone who does not scare easily, and this show was genuinely terrifying to me. I feel like there simply isn't a lot of horror-related kids media that isn't like, you know, every horror-related kids media thing is like really toned down to the point where it's not scary, I feel like. Despite the success of books like R.L. Stine's Goosebumps series have seen, also The Haunting Hour features so many familiar faces. It's kind of like a relic of the time. For example, Bailey Madison, Robert Capron, Dylan Minnette, Joey King, and even China Anne McClain. But unlike my last two videos on the topic, I felt like that format was kind of just a bit tired and decided to simply rank the episodes instead that I specifically remember watching as a kid on how badly they scared or traumatized me. So without further ado, let's get into the tiers real quickly. So the first tier is traumatized, self-explanatory, straight up traumatized me, and I rewatched it and I understand why. Next is the concept is scarier than the episode. This is for episodes where they weren't necessarily scary, but the concept at hand is just like really unnerving and would honestly make a good movie or something. Next is irrational fear. This is for a specific entry on the list. We also have kinda stupid for episodes that are kinda stupid. And then lastly, we have scarier when I was a kid. So without further ado, let's get into these episodes. The first one we're going to be talking about is called Mascot. So this story basically follows two boys, Willie and Drake, as they set out to replace their school's creepy mascot, Big Yellow. Just like by taking a look at Big Yellow alone, I think it's safe to assume what tier this episode is going to be put in. Before you ask, like, man, what is Big Yellow? I don't know. And neither do our main characters. The opening scene is them asking the same question, in fact.
What the heck is that thing anyway? Looks like it crawled out of some old guy's nose and grew claws.
Well, Yellow Valley is home to some prehistoric marsupials. Could be a nod to that.
Marsupials?
Yeah, like opossums.
The thing does not look like an opossum.
I mean, personally, I'll place my bets that, like, he has got to be a bug of some kind. Also, the song he always dances to has no right being this catchy. Anyways, the boys end up holding mascot tryouts because their goal is to replace Big Yellow because they're just sick of him. Who would it be? He looks like this. They pick this other mascot that's a wolf named Wolfie, even though Big Yellow does try out for being the mascot again because, like, everyone's allowed, you can't exclude. And then overnight, Wolfie gets, like, massacred, and shortly following this, the boys get in a fight, resulting in Willie really just wanting to get to the bottom of this mystery behind Big Yellow. Because, like, when they're asking, hey, who, like, is Big Yellow? No one seems to know who Big Yellow is. And then Willie finds his ID and it literally just says Big Yellow. Like, who is this? In fact, when he eventually finds Big Yellow alone and, you know, gets the courage to just pull the mascot's head off, there's no head. There's no one inside. The next day, he's completely just disappeared, really worrying Drake despite the fight they had, because that's still his friend after all. Then he ends up going to the varsity game, and when Big Yellow has just walked out, Drake once again calls him. He's been calling him all day, and he immediately hears Willie's ringtone. But when he follows the sound, it leads him to Big Yellow himself. And we cut to this scene of, like, Willie trapped inside Big Yellow with, like, the kid who also plays Wolfie, you know, who was massacred. And they're screaming for, like, Drake's help, only no one can hear them, and then Willie's phone dies. Not gonna lie, on, you know, some levels, this one is scarier than Lily D to me.
the haunting hours the mascot walked so that Five Nights at Freddy's could run.
Like, before Five Nights at Freddy's, this was my Five Nights at Freddy's. I know they're kind of different because, like, this is not an animatronic, obviously, but, like, the whole thing with, like, them being inside Big Yellow, the fact that he looks so uncanny, I don't know, it just, like, gives me that same vibe. So yeah, that episode was definitely traumatizing, and I think we can all agree. The next episode is called The Cast. Now, you probably expected me to mention Catching Cold when talking about episodes with Robert Capron in them, but today I wanted to highlight episode 3 of season 3 titled The Cast, because this one scared me shitless. So this episode follows our main character named Lex, and he breaks his left arm, resulting in him needing like a cast, obviously, so it can heal. And he breaks his arm like while vandalizing the home of this like old cat lady, and instead of just admitting his fault, like, you know, his other friends that were caught, in the process he only doubles down and clears his name by telling the cat lady that he had nothing to do with it. But the more he sticks to that story, the more his left arm just begins to itch, like inside his cast. And the more the cast itches, the more the neighborhood cats begin to take a liking, let's just say. Now, this one's gonna go in irrational fear because I've never broken a bone, so that should tell you everything you need to know about why this episode scared me so bad. But imagine if you watched it while you had a cast on. Maybe you could get the same effect I had. Because I was already scared enough of the concept of breaking a bone because that's horrifying, but to have like something potentially lurking inside your cast is even more terrifying, and it just unlocked a whole new layer to that fear for me as a kid. But what happens next is Lex lays down because he's like overcome by the itchiness inside his cast, even attempting to use a pencil to itch inside. And then he wakes up to the cat lady like just inside his home after his mom, I think she had like to go, I think she's in like some bowling thing, so like she wasn't home, she had left like right before he decided to lay down. And her many cats are just in his house too, and they just are so interested in him and his arm. And the cast starts to kind of like move, and then the lady pulls a mouse out of it and says, "Looks like you have an infestation." And then Lex goes to the kitchen terrified and he cuts the cast. And according to the paramedics, when they eventually arrive and it cuts to that, apparently he just, once he got it open, he didn't even stop sawing the cast off. He just kept sawing his arm. And then there's like this like weird scene where he's like talking to the guy in the ambulance with him, and he's like, you know, I'm not innocent. I also egged that old lady's house. No shit. No shit.
Hey, guess what? I did it. I was the one that egged the old lady's house. It was me all the time. She tried to get even, but I got away with it. I got rid of them all. I got them all out. Shh. If we're quiet, they'll go away.
Anyway, yeah, irrational fear. Catching Cold is definitely a terrifying episode too, but because I covered it, I wanted to prioritize this episode. But yeah, the thought of something in a cast and you can't take it off because you're healing, I can't. This one still scares me, in fact, like the concept of that. I would be horrified. Moving on, we have episode 7 of season 1, titled Wrong Number. And scare factor wise, this episode is one of the weaker ones in my opinion. This episode stars Debbie Ryan as our main character Stephanie Howard, a stuck-up popular high schooler. And I'm just gonna assume she's rich because her father is never home, and it kind of reminds me of that trope where like money doesn't always equal happiness and they have an absent parent. However, she lives in an apartment, so like I could be wrong and she's probably just middle class. But her apartment complex is very important to this story, which is why I bring it up. So Stephanie and her best friend Taylor Turner are hanging out at Stephanie's one night, blasting some song, which I think Debbie Ryan is singing. It sounds like her singing voice, which I recognize because if you watched Jessie, the theme song, she sings the theme song.
Red nails. Oh my god, I love this song. She's reckless with the heart.
Anyway, this gets the attention of her elderly next-door neighbor, but Stephanie only doubles down, turning up the music and continuously throughout the episode just calling her an old hag.
Nobody cares, you old hag.
After they eventually end up having like a confrontation with her at the front door, Stephanie ends up prank calling her a bunch as revenge, when it's obvious that it's her prank calling the lady to begin with, and the lady knows this. But the next day, however, the paramedics show up to the old lady's house, and it's apparent to the girls that the old lady died. Shortly after this, weird things just start to happen, specifically to Stephanie, but sometimes Taylor because she's, you know, Stephanie's best friend. But if it wasn't scary, why did I include this episode? Besides Debbie Ryan being in it, which I thought was really cool, the twist was just very interesting to me and made the watching experience ultimately worth it in the end. Basically, from like not even 2 minutes into this episode, it's apparent that Stephanie is picking on this goth girl named Adriana and eventually goes to her for help with her being haunted by this old lady. Because of how Adriana dresses, she assumes that she's a witch or into witchcraft. Of course, Adriana debunks these claims, but ultimately says her uncle can help and gives Stephanie his address. In the end, Stephanie was basically set up. She ends up getting trapped in her own phone while the lady lets Taylor leave because she sees good in her. I mean, Stephanie literally introduces Taylor as the slightly hot girl on her left after calling herself the extremely hot girl, and also says at one point that she's such a follower. At least she's self-aware of what she's doing, but I just don't know how Taylor is like friends with her, to be honest. She seems to treat her pretty poorly, but Taylor definitely isn't innocent either, if that makes sense. But what's the plot twist, you may ask? Well, the old lady was Adriana's grandma and was getting revenge on Stephanie because she was picking on Adriana. Honestly justified. I've got to say, Stephanie Howard is one of the most insufferable, mean, popular girl characters I've like ever had to witness. Like, I almost had to click off because she literally has no personality. I think this one's gonna go into scarier than I was a kid, but I definitely still enjoyed the watch because of the plot twist at the end and, you know, just having a goth character. There's a goth character in the Haunting Hour movies. I don't know if that aspect was like inspired by the character in that movie, but I really want to watch the movie next year because of her. I could watch it sooner, but I think it would be fun to save it for a Halloween special next year. Now, the next 2 episodes I'm going to talk about are actually, they were supposed to be in my last Haunting Hour video, but I ended up cutting them from my script because I was kind of on a time crunch. I was about to graduate and it was getting a little too lengthy, I believe. So starting with The Perfect Brother, on surface level, this is kind of tame compared to the other episodes this series has, but it's like the plot twist that, you know, freaked me out so bad. It's really just unnerving in its own way. This story follows 2 brothers, Matt and Josh. The dynamic between them is the classic, like, parents obviously favor one sibling over the other trope. Like in one of the first scenes of this episode where the parents and their sons are eating dinner at the table, the mom mentions like how the boys were supposed to get their or receive their report cards today, but when she like actually looks at them and Josh has straight B's, which is still really good grades, by the way, and his brother Matt has all A's, she's extremely disappointed in Josh. But she doesn't spare Matt either because she sees that he got an A-. Bro, I swear the way this mom talks is just so robotic, which is kind of ironic when you think about, you know, what the episode's about, but let's not jump ahead. I just wanted to bring up this scene because, like, I don't understand how parents treat their kids like this when it comes to grades, especially when it's obvious they work hard and don't slack off. It kind of makes me thankful in a way that I went to a Montessori school, so for the first 9 years of my life, there weren't letter grades, because I know it would have made me get really in my head about things even more than I already was. So shortly after dinner, Matt starts acting extremely weird, like stuttering even though he usually doesn't have a stutter, and he falls random, like he's just walking and he just like collapses all of a sudden, like. But when Josh finally suspects something, because he literally like starts making fun of him, and it kind of pissed me off. But he definitely like shows that he cares for his brother throughout the rest of this episode, so don't get it twisted. But when he finally shows some concern, Matt just like says he's just tired. And he even wakes up to Matt like just sitting up in his bed, and he's like, hey, what are you doing? And he just doesn't answer. And then eventually he just lays back down, and Josh is like, what the fuck? But when he falls again the next day at school, Josh becomes ultimately frustrated when his mother outright refuses to take Matt to the hospital. Like, the nurse recommended at their school, and instead is just taking him home.
No, I'm taking your brother home. He needs to rest.
But the nurse at school said...
I'm handling this, Joshua. Sit back.
Well, you're not handling this. He's not doing well. You're just taking him home. Wait, he needs to go to a doctor.
I said sit back.
Things only get weirder when the dad says he's taking Matt to the hospital finally, but refuses to let Josh even come. Moments before, Matt and Josh were eavesdropping on the parents, and they say the experiment has failed, which gets Josh really suspicious. And then eventually he questions his mom when she finds like her taking stuff out of his room, and then she ends up like locking him in the room or locking him out of the room. I really couldn't tell. This leads though to Josh going to the address that popped up when he searched the number his parents had called before they took Matt to the hospital. Or the hospital. It's not the hospital. It's like a like address, but it doesn't have a name of like what it is. And upon further inspection, the person on the phone isn't anyone at a hospital. It's just like a person asking for a username or password, and then it denies him access. So in the end, he sneaks into this facility. It ends up being a facility, and he finds his brother, who explains, you know, how mom and dad care so much about perfection. Well, that's the experiment they were talking about. Okay, Matt is actually a robot.
It's my time.
I'm not leaving without you.
No, let go of me.
He tells Josh not to risk his life by trying to save him, but Josh does anyway because that's his brother, I mean, robot or not. But then he's immediately caught. This one's gonna go in concept is scarier than episode because this concept alone is extremely disturbing to me. The facility is terrifying. And just when you think it's like all over, it gets even worse because Josh, when he gets home after being escorted out of the facility by the police, his parents want to sit down and have a talk with him. They explain that Matt wasn't actually the experiment. Okay, plot twist, he's the experiment. See, how I mentioned the like mom's roboticness in the beginning? Well, she's a robot. So is his dad, so is Matt, of course, and Josh is the only human in fact. Like, even his best friend shows up when he's trying to leave, and it's just like,
you were great before you knew.
And then the episode ends with Josh being shoved into this giant, like, return defective box, and then the dad says, sorry, we prefer our own kind.
Sorry, but we prefer our own kind.
No! No! I'm your son! I'm your son!
No, you're not.
What? This episode also stars Greg Sulker. I did not mention that, but he's there. Yeah, just really disturbing concept. Now this one would make a great movie or like mini series of some kind. I wish we got more in depth of the rest of the people at his school. Like, he has a best friend, but we literally see him like twice, so there's no emotional attachment when we find out he's also a robot. And then the next episode that I was also supposed to cover was Brush with Madness, which follows Corey and his best friend Emma. We open to the two of them at this Comic-Con thing, like waiting in line for Corey to meet one of his idols, Alan Miller, who's like a comic book artist, and Corey is an artist himself, so, you know, he inspires him a lot. And he's literally so nervous, in fact, that he doesn't know what to say initially, so he kind of gets rushed out, and then he starts like kind of splurting everything like nervously that he was going to say, but he kind of like didn't have time because he, you know, blanked. So then as he's kind of being escorted by like the security guy, he accidentally says, I follow you, instead of I follow you on Twitter.
I follow you, you know.
Which, in his defense, he clarifies shortly after, saying he misspoke, but it's too late because Alan Miller gets like all freaked out and leaves. After Alan leaves, Corey immediately notices that he left his brushes, and apparently Alan uses the same brushes for all of his work, so Corey thinks he should go run after him to return the brushes because they mean a lot to Alan. But before he even gets a chance to be like, hey, like, you left your brushes and I'm really sorry about what happened, Alan like flips the fuck out on Corey and starts yelling at him for no reason, but like I get where he's coming from at the same time.
Wait, this really freaking...
Stay away from me. Don't follow me. Don't write me letters. Don't tweet me your inane little questions every 5 minutes.
So since he didn't take the paintbrushes, Corey ends up taking them because, in his words, he tried to give them back, which honestly he's justified. I mean, I don't really think I would have taken them if I were in his situation, but I kind of get it. Emma is absolutely not having this though, so he promises her that he'll mail them back tomorrow, but obviously this episode wouldn't exist if he did that. Long story short, he doesn't, and he begins using them for his artwork, which Emma still isn't amused by. She literally he was asking her opinion on his artwork, and she knew that he used the brushes, so she was just like, cool, I guess. What? I understand where Emma's coming from in this episode, but honestly, she pissed me off so much, like, but at the same time, I have to admire her, because literally her style is so camp. The plot of this episode basically is that these drawings, they start to come to life and show up on Corey's walls. Like, for example, when he's on the phone with Emma, she shows up on one of the panels all of a sudden. He shortly after this discovers that Alan's house is exactly like the one he painted, which...
How do you know his address?
And what I mean by the house he painted was, like, after he got the brushes, he just had a sudden, like, burst of inspiration, so he did a lot of painting, and he painted a house. Emma ends up getting really mad at him, though, after she suggests to paint more panels, and the panels end up only being her, even though he swears, like, he's not in control of what he's painting, the brushes are. This causes Emma to ultimately storm off, and Corey goes, you know, to her house to check on her after, and finds, you know, paint on the walls that says, "She's mine." So he races over to Alan's house from his drawings and finds Emma there, who's strapped down to a board. He frantically, like, starts to unstrap her when she says, "I don't understand how you can be here." And then we just, like, kind of black out, and suddenly Corey is now strapped down too and, like, confused at what happened. But then as the mad artist, which is implied to be Corey, or like a twin of Corey, you know, is about to saw him in half, it fades to a comic panel, and it's revealed Alan Miller has actually been writing a comic book about Corey this whole time, only to shred the whole thing after his, like, security guard asks, "What do you think he'll think of this book?" And he's like, "Oh, well, he'll never read it." And then he shreds it. I feel like this episode wasn't very scary, and I feel like the pacing was a bit weird. So I think I'm gonna put this in concept is scarier than the episode, because I still think it was really cool. Again, you know, these episodes are kind of short, so I do wish some things were fleshed out a little bit more before we jumped right into, oh my god, this thing is happening. Also, Dylan Minnette is in this episode. I didn't even mention. You probably know by now, but I didn't mention that. Next, we have Dreamcatcher, which stars Sadie from Girl vs. Monster. I mentioned this in last week's video. Dreamcatcher is your classic summer camp legend come to life story. It takes place at a summer camp called Pine Mountain, and the tension arises when one of the main characters, Meg, she hates this new camper, Lisa, but Meg's friend, Amelia, feels really optimistic about new people going to the camp this year and ends up befriending her. So Meg decides to tell Lisa about a camp legend, just to be mean and make her feel less welcome and frighten her. Basically, there was supposedly a tragedy here at Pine Mountain where one of the campers died in her sleep because she had nightmares where she saw a monster that she called the Dreamcatcher. She claimed the Dreamcatcher took away all her good dreams, and every time she closed her eyes, he was there ready to grab her. The girl claimed that he was real, and nobody really believed her until she stopped sleeping completely, which caused her to start seeing things, and eventually she really couldn't stay awake any longer, falling into a
deep, deep, deep sleep.
So as we can tell, this leads to Lisa experiencing the same type of nightmares and eventually refusing to sleep too, along with Amelia, so they're kind of in this together. I mentioned in my other video where I covered this episode that the camp counselor quite literally doesn't deny that this is like a fake story or anything.
Are you saying that a camper didn't die here, Justine?
Look, that was a really long time ago, okay? Way before we were even born. Plus, girls have your dream catchers, right? You should be just fine.
When Meg cuts their dream catchers, which they made early in the episode, it's a camp tradition, all she gets is like kitchen duty. And then their camp counselor just says, "Oh, but your dream catchers still look very pretty." Okay, thanks, I guess. Like, you basically confirmed this was a real story that happened at camp, and then point out, like, you guys have your dream catchers, you'll be okay, but don't see any problem with them being slashed, like no kind of concern. I think the scariest part of this episode by far has got to be the dream catcher himself. Basically, this episode ends with Amelia getting trapped in this spiderweb cave, and Lisa goes into her dream to save her friend, which goes horribly wrong when one of them gets their shoe stuck as they're leaving, causing them to ultimately fall over, trying to get the shoe unstuck in the process. Meg walks in shortly after this and is getting ready to ditch them when she also falls over and gets stuck, so then the Dreamcatcher shows up and like towers over the girls, like ready to gobble them up. And that's when the plot twist occurs. Lisa had actually set an alarm to wake them up, which saves them essentially. So they wake up from this dream, leaving only Meg to get the karma that she truly deserves. So yeah, I'm gonna put this one in traumatized. The Dreamcatcher alone and the concept of like, you know, not sleeping, a mixture of that and the fact that I used to go to a summer camp really traumatized me. Next we have Scary Mary, which is a 2-part episode from season 1 that follows a group of friends who decide to play a game called Scary Mary. Very similar to Bloody Mary. One person like stands in front of a mirror with a candle and you turn off all the lights and you say, Scary Mary looking through, Scary Mary, she sees you, Scary Mary looking through, Scary Mary, she's got you. Basically, Mary was this girl from like 100 years ago who lived up in a farm in the middle of nowhere, and Mary was very lonely, so she used to dress up in her grandma's old party dress just to look at herself in the mirror. But one day a fire broke out in the farmhouse and she didn't realize until it was too late and she burned in the fire. So obviously they played the game, and our main character Hannah, who initially was very resistant to playing at all, becomes obsessed with Scary Mary after the game. I think why this episode stuck with me for so long is because Hannah ends up summoning Mary again on her own, and she gets pulled into the mirror by these masked girls. And then when Hannah is given a choice in this alternate universe to choose her mask because Mary doesn't like to see people without them, Hannah like pulls this girl's mask off and her face is just blank, like she has no face.
I don't want a mask. You must choose. She doesn't like to see us without them.
Why? What do you look like?
I don't know.
Let me see.
No. Stop! Get away!
It's like one of those thumbs from Spy Kids or like Slenderman. I also just think it's the fact that it's based off Bloody Mary and like that's every kid's worst fear. This truly sounds like a creepypasta, but you know, it's honestly because it takes inspiration from a folklore tale like Bloody Mary. I think it's like mostly the summoning her that inspired it though, not like the concept of Scary Mary and like her origins and living on the farmhouse and burning in the fire. In general, the way Mary facilitates conversations with other masked girls in this universe, I don't know what to call it. It's not another universe, it's just like so creepy. This is kind of a hard one to rank because I don't know if this episode is necessarily as scary as some of the other ones I've seen. Mostly sticked with me because like obviously I was scared of Bloody Mary. Yeah, no, I think I was looking too much into it. I think I'm just gonna put it in straight up traumatized. And lastly, the final episode we'll be talking about today, of course I had to save this best for last, is Really You, also known as Lily D. This episode follows a girl named Lily who gets a Really You doll, which is like kind of like an American Girl doll, I think. Don't quote me on that. I've never had an American Girl doll. Like, not only were they expensive as fuck, but I think this episode was probably the reason I just never had an interest in getting one. The only dolls I ever really had growing up were like Monster High, Bradzilla's, and a singular Novi Stars doll. I just think I'm very much more of like a fashion doll person than I am like a realistic doll person. Except I did have some Barbies for a short period of time. My favorite was this like SpongeBob Barbie that like I cut off all her hair and dyed it blue and red with Sharpies. That was my weird Barbie. Anyway, she gets this doll and weird things start to happen almost immediately, which Lily gets all the blame for, like spilling a smoothie on her mom's computer, writing bad girl on her mom's wall, and breaking the mirror on Lily's vanity. This is probably the most infamous episode of The Haunting Hour, and I mean, I can't blame y'all because this one has stuck with me for the longest. And it has Bailey Madison in it. I mean, I swear that girl is in everything. And for that, I just have to automatically rank it at traumatizing.
Who's surprised?
I feel like this one could also work for like concept is scarier than the episode, but it straight up traumatized me because I just didn't like dolls very much. Or it's not like I didn't like them very much because like I had dolls. It was more like realistic dolls that freaked me out. You know how people have been asking their boyfriends how often they think of the Roman Empire? This is my Roman Empire because I think about Lily D at least once a week. The scene where Lily's legs turn into plastic and she has to crawl frantically on the floor to try to get her mom's attention in time, but ultimately gets taken over by the doll, is literally horrifying. This is like nightmare fuel. The mom in these episodes too, like, it's a two-parter, actually gets on my nerves big time, and I really can't stand her.
Don't you talk! I just don't know what to do. I wish you were my daughter.
Like, how are you gonna only realize that, you know, something is wrong when the doll, like, the doll has Lily's birthmark, and that's how she notices that, you know, the doll is Lily, and the real Lily is the doll. But you're not gonna notice anything when your daughter is literally sick and you have to take her to the doctor, and then apparently she smashes her own mirror after you just took her to the doctor and she's clearly unwell. Like, why is she gonna smash her own vanity? Make it make sense. Also, why are you putting the doll in the bed to sleep with you and your husband?
That thing's not sleeping in the bed. Is it?
He had the right to be weirded the fuck out by that. Like, I'm sorry, I wouldn't be caught sleeping with that thing. The fact that the brother is the only one who seems to even be concerned about Lily's well-being because she really thinks that the doll's alive. She sticks to this story. She doesn't claim anything different because she's not going to incriminate herself when she didn't do anything wrong. Lily is quite a brat at the beginning of this episode, but I think this experience with Lily D gave her like a rude awakening. But yeah, those were some episodes of R.L. Stine's The Haunting Hour. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and let me know what episode of The Haunting Hour, like, scared you the most as a kid, or even if you watched it when you were a little older. I might do another video covering The Haunting Hour in the future. I don't know, I've done like 3 now, so maybe I should stop. But no one talks about this show. Like, I can't help it. It needs to be talked about because it was really that good. Anyways, I hope you guys have a happy Halloween, and I will see you guys in my next video.